What's going on, everybody? Welcome to my Overwatch League Stage 3 Power Rankings. It's been a while since I've done one of these. In fact, my most recent Power Rankings video was uploaded on April 1st. Making my rankings for Stage 3 have been the hardest to date. Just know that a handful of these teams are practically interchangeable due to having a similar skill level. I mostly based my rankings off of how well teams did in Stage 3 and how good I think they are at the moment. And that's basically everything you need to know, so without wasting any more time, let's get started. Kicking the rankings off at number 20, I have the Florida Mayhem. I feel like this one is kind of hard to argue against because of how poorly they played through 14 games. They currently have a 1-13 record, which puts them dead last in the overall standings. Kind of like with Stage 1, this team has done absolutely nothing to catch my attention. They clearly lack the skill needed to compete with the majority of the teams in the league. I will admit that their acquisition of Fate does intrigue me, but he has underperformed on the Valiant, and I find it hard to believe that he'll do a lot better on an even worse team. Until they show me results, Florida will continue to be the worst team in the league for me. Moving on to number 19, I have the Houston Outlaws. These guys are coming off an extremely disappointing stage. It was so bad that they even joined the 0-7 club alongside the Valiant and Mayhem. This team actually hit a brand new low with how bad they played recently, and it goes beyond their record too. The team managed to win only 4 maps. Yep, that's right, you heard me right. The Outlaws won 4 maps in 7 games. The more I think about this team, the more I realize that they're an absolute mess. Players such as Jake, Coolmat, and Raucus have looked washed up for quite some time now. In my opinion, the Outlaws have 3 good players at most. Linkzr, Dante, and Muma are the only decent players they have at this point. And with the Outlaws ownership still in the process of being sold, Houston will probably be stuck with what they have until everything is sorted out. So long as this team remains unchanged, I see no reason why they wouldn't be a bottom team again in Stage 3. Coming in at my number 18 spot is the Washington Justice. I'll be honest, I think that the Justice very well could be better than this. The team has potential, and I would say there's definitely a chance they end up on the rise soon. In Stage 2, they acquired both Arc and Sleepy to massively improve their support line. Now that they are more acquainted with their team, and because Janus has shown improvement, I feel like Washington could be decent. However, this team still only has 2 wins at the end of the day, so I cannot trust them to win 2 to 3 games in a stage until they can prove to me otherwise. Next up is the LA Valiant. This team has showed much improvement in Stage 2 after a horrible 0-7 start to their year. Unfortunately, going 3-4 is nothing to write home about. Beating the Justice and a Reign team that was struggling at the time doesn't help their case either. I do think this team has been getting better though. Putting Karif back on flex support and having KSF take over the Zarya role has worked wonders. But even so, I fear that this team may have suffered a setback after trading Fate to the Mayhem in return for Fact Fiction, McGravy, and Shaxx. Is there a chance that Fact Fiction plays better than Fate? Sure, I don't see why not, but he could end up being worse at the same time. Whether or not this move works out, I get a feeling that it might take the rest of the team some time to adjust to their new main tank, which leads me to believe that the team may have a slow start. Their tough schedule doesn't make the situation any better. Coming in at my number 16 spot is the Guangzhou Charge. It's sad how much this team seems to have fallen off since Stage 1. Things have been kind of ugly since then, and yes, I know they played some tough opponents in Stage 2, but there's no excuse to not take a single map in 4 straight games, especially when one of your opponents is the Paris Eternal of all teams. The Charge definitely have untapped potential though. This team at their best can compete against some of the league's top teams. Now it's just a matter of putting in the work and learning from their mistakes. Up next, I've got the Paris Eternal. After a disappointing start to their year, Paris decided that it would be best to make some lineup changes. Shadowburn would play Brigitte since Nico swapped over to the Diva role eventually, LH Cloudy became the new main tank since Ben Best was feeding, and Gray would take over on flex support in an attempt to bring a spark that Hip couldn't. At first, these changes seemed like they may have worked, but it very quickly became apparent that this was not the case at all. In fact, they were still the same mediocre team we saw from Stage 1, and I highly doubt that will change until the Eternal makes some new roster additions. It is painfully obvious that this team needs a better Rein and Zarya player. So much for being one of the top GOATS teams in the league. Until the Eternal make some roster additions, or somehow improve, they will not move up any higher in my power rankings. Now we have the Toronto Defiant. It's been a tale of 2 stages for these guys. In Stage 1, they were a playoff team. In Stage 2, they were a struggling team that couldn't get a lot of wins. The sudden retirement of their Brigitte player Stellar really seemed to take its toll. It was painfully obvious that the team was missing his leadership and shot calling. I'm37 is a DPS player that's very talented, don't get me wrong, but his Brig definitely needs some work. Toronto swapping him and Ivy between the Zarya and Brigitte roles probably only made things worse. All of these changes really seem to mess with Ivy in particular. It's a shame too. His Zarya was deadly during Stage 1. Toronto are in for even more changes in Stage 3 though. The signing of the main tank player Shrake and the off tank player Gods shows that the Defiant are transitioning from an all-Korean roster to a mixed one where English is the common language. While the team will probably go through some rough patches at first, I'm37 should be able to help translate for both his Korean and English teammates until everybody's comfortable enough to make clear callouts 100% of the time. With Toronto's schedule being on the lighter side this time around, they should be able to play a bit better, but until they are a decent GOATS team again, I have no choice but to keep them at my number 14 spot. Coming in at number 13 is the Atlanta Reign. I would say that this team is definitely one of the most interesting in the entire league. They've looked so good and yet so bad at the same time since DeFrance's departure and Babybay's arrival. One game they're losing to the Valiant and the next they're beating the NYXL. They're honestly such a strange team. I can't make up my mind on how good I actually think they are. They definitely have talented pieces. The problem is that they suffer from inconsistency. They clearly have what it takes to be competitive if they can beat the NYXL twice. Now they just have to find a way to play this well more often. But until that day comes, they're still an average team in my eyes. Up next is the Chengdu Hunters. They might have had the exact same record as they did in Stage 1, but I feel like this team is improving. They appear to be more competitive in their losses and a bit more dominant in their wins this time around. And if they won their game against the Valiant, then they would have made the playoffs over the Dragons. I like the direction this team is going. And with their other main tank finally getting his visa approved, the Hunters should be a stronger team. As much as we all love Among, the team suffered from being able to run any composition they wanted to since he can't play Winston. His Wrecking Ball and Reinhardt are really good, don't get me wrong, but having a more flexible main tank could be just what this team needs to take their game to the next level. But like with many of the other middle of the pack teams, the Hunters need to be more consistent. They're in a very similar situation to the Reign, where they can beat a strong team one game, then lose to a weak one in the next. The moment the Hunters show me more consistency, I will gladly move them up in my power rankings, but until that happens, they will stay at my number 12 spot. Rounding out the bottom half of my power rankings are the Boston Uprising. The team wasn't really much worse record-wise compared to Stage 1, but it felt like they were struggling. This is pretty evident by the fact that they had to reverse sweep in 2 of those wins. Sure, reverse sweep victory shows that your team can be clutch, but it also means that you lack the ability to play well for an entire game. The only quality win they really got was against the Gladiators in a 3-1 victory, but it's also worth noting that they got reverse swept by the Justice in the exact same week, once again proving that they can't play well in 2 halves of a game. I still have faith that Boston can be good, but that could change really soon if they don't get their act together. Alright guys, it's time for the top half of my rankings, and starting off at number 10, I've got the Shanghai Dragons. Now this is a team that's been trending in the right direction. Sure, they weren't anything spectacular in Stage 2, but they did make the stage playoffs, and taking a map off of the Shock, who only dropped 3 maps all stage long, is definitely something that we have to commend them for. Their Somber Goats comp really gave the Shock a challenge. I feel like Shanghai finally found a lineup that they feel comfortable running. It took a while, but this team finally discovered their identity in the Goats meta, and it couldn't have happened at a better time. The Dragons have a pretty easygoing schedule, so I'm expecting them to make the playoffs once again this stage. While I do have high regards for the Dragons, I refuse to see them as anything more than a top 10 team at best until they can defeat some of the stronger teams in the league. If they can beat the Fusion, and at least push a team to the brink in the stage playoffs, then I'll be ready to admit they're better than top 10. Coming in at number 9 is the Philly Fusion. This team missed the playoffs in Stage 2 because of their brutal schedule. Playing the NYXL twice and the Shock is pretty rough. I feel like this team could compete with the majority of the Tier 2 teams in the league though. This year the Fusion have tended to beat the teams they're supposed to, then lose to the ones they're inferior to. This team has a history of being inconsistent, so yet again they might be kind of bad in Stage 3, but at the same time, there's also the chance that the Fusion could do well this stage, but I don't know if they're definitely better than some of the teams I have higher in the rankings. I'll be honest when I say that this part of the power rankings is pretty tough. Teams 9 through 5 are pretty interchangeable, I feel like. But anyway, coming in at my number 8 spot is the Dallas Fuel. The Fuel are coming off of a solid 5-2 stage and a playoff appearance. Dallas, I feel like, is in a situation that is similar to the Fusion. They tend to beat the teams you'd expect them to, but lose to anybody who's better than them. My one issue with the Fuel is that they look good in their wins, but seem to get completely outplayed in their losses. I think that Dallas has some really nice pieces, but now it's a matter of taking that next step. No more of these big losses. Let's see you be more competitive, Dallas. Up next is the London Spitfire, and yes, I am very aware that they were the 2 seed in the playoffs and went 6-1 during Stage 2. I give them credit for tremendously improving their Goats play, but I feel like some people may be overrating them a tad. After all, they got outplayed by the Hunters and completely dismantled by the Spark in the stage playoffs. While this team has taken significant strides compared to Stage 1, I feel like they still have their work cut out for them. Don't get me wrong, London fans, your team is good, but they're still too inconsistent on Goats for my liking to consider them top 5 in the league. Coming in at my number 6 spot is the Seoul Dynasty. While it is true that they have fallen off a little bit compared to Stage 1, I feel like this team is flying under the radar as a potential threat for some people. Marvel, Michelle, Fitz, Munchkin, Jaehong, and Toby have proven to be quite the strong unit. I honestly believe that this team could beat anybody in the league other than the Shock and Titans. Expect them to be a bit more dominant in Stage 3 since they don't have to face the Titans twice this time around. With a pretty manageable schedule, I'm expecting the Dynasty to be in the mix for a playoff spot once again. Now we have the Hangzhou Spark. I feel that these guys are still a little on the inconsistent side and have plenty of room for improvement, but what they did in Stage 2 is undeniably impressive. Beating the Dynasty and the Spitfire in back-to-back games proved to me that they are worthy of being considered a top 5 team in the league. Gushwei and Crystal appear to be a lot more comfortable playing with their Korean teammates now, and the Spark have really taken off as a result. It's also worth noting that the Spark's only losses of Stage 2 came to the Shock and Titans. Call it a gut feeling if you'd like, but I believe that the Spark will consistently win games from here on out. The Spark take on some tough teams this stage. This will be the ultimate test to prove if they are worthy of being a top team in the league. Let's see if they can beat other tier 2 teams such as the Fusion, Fuel, and Dynasty. At number 4, I have the LA Gladiators. Although this team would look underwhelming in the playoffs after finishing stage 2 with a 6-1 record, I think this team is well on their way to becoming a dangerous squad. I've mentioned it a lot here on the channel already, but Roar and Decay seem to be fitting in well with their new team. Their tank play has been superb, and I think that their level of dominance will only increase as their English improves. It's not just Roar and Decay who have shown improvement though. Everybody seems to have stepped up their game. Not only that, but their starting lineup is honestly looking like one of the strongest in the entire league right now. Oh, and don't be alarmed if the Gladiators end up losing 2+ games this stage. They have one of the toughest schedules in the league since they have to play the Titans twice. Now we're down to what is probably the most obvious top 3 in the power rankings ever. And kicking off the top 3 is of course the NYXL. There really isn't much to be said about these guys. It's pretty clear at this point that they are the clear-cut number 3 team in the league. They can beat everyone below them with the exception of Atlanta, but they're outclassed by the Titans and Shock at the same time in the current meta. Unless this team seriously steps up their game, we'll probably just see them dominate until they run into either the Shock or Titans again. At the number 2 spot on my list, I have the Vancouver Titans, and while they're still definitely without a doubt in a class of their own alongside the Shock, I can't say they're number 1 right now. It's pretty close, but I have them falling just short of the top spot in my rankings. But even so, Vancouver is still really, really good. After all, they've only lost once through 14 regular season matches and 6 playoff games. They also have the top record in the league and have gone to both stage finals. No team has been more dominant over the first 2 stages. Not having them at the 1 or 2 spot would be foolish. And last, but certainly not least, the number 1 team is the San Francisco Shock. What is there to say about their stage 2 that hasn't already been said? They displayed some of the strongest Overwatch we've seen in recent memory. Their undefeated record while only dropping 3 maps on the way to becoming stage champions is evident of this. The Titans, and I guess the Dragons to a certain extent, were the only teams who could even give the Shock a challenge. Vancouver did a good job of pushing them in the stage 2 grand finals, but even they couldn't fend off San Francisco's rampage. That loss in the stage 1 finals really seemed to motivate these guys. They somehow found a way to look even stronger than they did in stage 1. It's pretty obvious at this point that the Shock have a top 3 player at each position. Super, Choyobin, Sinatra, Rascal, Violet, and Moth make up arguably the most powerful GOATS lineup in the entire Overwatch League. Their dominance has been something else, and I don't see any reason why it won't continue unless they start sandbagging or some of the other teams in the league improve drastically. And I think that pretty much wraps up everything I had to say about each team, ladies and gentlemen. So what did you guys think of my stage 3 power rankings? Make sure to let me know down in the comment section, and feel free to leave your own rankings while you're at it. If you enjoyed today's content, then be sure to like and subscribe. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.